If you're in tune with Christian YouTube, you may have heard about the matter involving John Lindell and Mark Driscoll at the Stronger Men's Conference. And that conference happened earlier in April. Now, the men's conference apparently opened with a performance by a dancer who took off his shirt, climbed up a pole, and swallowed a sword. It didn't necessarily happen in that order, but these are things that happened at this conference. Now, Driscoll was set to speak at the conference, and when he got up to speak, he started his remarks by calling out the performance, talking about the spirit of Jezebel. Now, there's a lot that we can say about his characterization of the spirit of Jezebel, and what felt to me like a broad swipe against women, but that's for another video. Lindell told Driscoll as he was speaking that Driscoll was out of line. And Driscoll was invited to leave the stage, which he did. Now, I want to speak principally about that situation. Driscoll getting up to speak, being told that he was out of line, and then him leaving. There has been a lot that has happened since that. A lot of allegations around phone calls, text messages. I'm not going to get into that second part too much in this video, but I want to acknowledge that this situation did not end with Driscoll being escorted from the stage. It has ramped up, and there are other videos that talk about that. So instead, I'm going to focus on Mark's comments at the start of his presentation, and which, by the way, he didn't get a chance to finish. Hi, everyone. This is the PR Whisperer. I'm a public relations coach, and on this page, I offer commentary from the lenses of public relations and faith. For today's podcast, I'm going to talk more about PR tips, and I'll also share a little bit about faith. So you're going to get both. Now, my intention is to give Christians and also leaders, people who convene large gatherings, something to think about as they plan future events. If you're listening to this and you find yourself in the midst of navigating a crisis, and perhaps you need crisis communication support, I would invite you to go to my website, www.spotlightpr.org, and schedule a paid consultation, and I'd be happy to speak with you, and together we could decide if my services and if I might be a help to you. So, as I start this discussion, I first have to acknowledge that there's a lot of history involving Mark Driscoll. Now, his background offers context, I think, for how we might view what he says and also how he shows up. Now, I don't believe that people should be tethered to their past. We all have a past. But I also don't believe that we can 100% disregard a person's past. I think that a person's past may offer context for who they are, why they do what they do. And so I think that we have to pay attention to both. I say that to say, given allegations against Driscoll and some of the prior challenges that he has had, we have to be mindful of that as we hear about what happened at this conference. Now, by the way, there's a whole podcast, and it was produced by Christianity Today, and it's called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill Church. And that was a church that Driscoll led, I think, up until 2015. He's now pastoring a church in Scottsdale, Arizona. Julie Roys also has done a number of episodes on her podcast about Mark Driscoll. So if you don't understand who he is, or if you don't have context for what I'm saying about, considering a person's background, I recommend that you do some research before continuing this video. So here are a couple things that I observed and that I want to share with you from a PR perspective. So first, the best way to manage a crisis is to prevent it before it unfolds. The organizers of this event should have thought about their audience and should have ensured that each person who was on the agenda would speak to their audience, and when I say speak to, I don't mean verbally, but would resonate with their audience. If there was a sense that any portion of the agenda was going to be controversial, the planners of this conference had at least two options. One would be to offer context and to give some kind of framing for the audience about what they were going to receive. Another option is to eliminate that portion from the program altogether. Now, there was some confusion at the conference over Alex Magala's presentation. Now, Alex is the gentleman who I referenced earlier who took his shirt off during the conference. He's also the one who climbed the pole and swallowed the sword. Now, in a Christian setting, I don't know how a person taking off their shirt is going to be palatable for most Christian audiences. And so the conveners of the Stronger Men's Conference, I think they should have known that. And perhaps they did consider it and they just didn't think that it was a big deal. But to me, I don't know how a Christian men's conference would not be able to flag that the optics of that could raise questions or could raise eyebrows. So again, when you think about Mark Driscoll, there are allegations that he made calls to John Lindell's son after the fact and made unsavory, if not harmful, allegations about James River Church, with which John Lindell pastors, and also the leadership of that church. If it is true that Driscoll did indeed do this, I have to ask, are we surprised given his background and given allegations against him? Like, is that surprising? And so when I talk about managing a crisis before it unfolds, it is thinking through what could get us off of mission or what could distract from what we're trying to do. And by the way, a crisis is considered anything that takes you off mission or off purpose. Sometimes when we hear the word crisis, we think of something that is massive, but anything that disrupts your ability to do your work or that creates all kinds of questions that keep people from focusing on your work at hand, and instead they're thinking about these questions, that is considered a crisis. So the organizers of this event, in my opinion, they should have thought about how these two situations, Mark Driscoll and this man who took his shirt off at the church, how that might have distracted from the broader purpose or the broader intention of this conference. Again, I think a lot of this could have been avoided because, again, a person taking off their shirt at a men's conference, that's always going to raise questions from an optics perspective. If this were a men's fitness event, if this were a gathering of men, not Christian men, then maybe that would have been okay. But whenever you have people of faith assembled, there is always going to be a different expectation and a higher level of responsibility. Sometimes when leaders are planning events, they may talk about and they may share their ideas and their intention. But if the group who is putting together the event, if they don't feel comfortable, if they don't feel empowered to speak truthfully, they are not going to raise different issues. And so that's, again, a whole nother topic in terms of creating the atmosphere where people feel comfortable telling you the truth, or they feel comfortable saying, hey, this could be an issue. If that environment does not exist in any organization, you are not going to get the truth. You're going to get people who shake their heads in agreement, but in their heart, maybe they have concerns. And had they raised those concerns, maybe that would have averted a crisis or a distraction. The other thing that I'll share is from a PR perspective, when you're planning events or when you're planning to give a public appearance or a public speech, you always want to start with the end in mind. What do you want to happen? How do you want people to feel? What do you want the headline to be? Sometimes when I'm doing strategy sessions with a client and we're planning a campaign, I ask them, what headline would make you happy? What central message, if people walked away from this event and they had one central message about that event, what would you want that to do? When you start with those questions and when you start with that intention, it helps you guide everything else. It helps guide everything else from who speaks to, the decisions that you make to ensure that people have a certain experience. So again, you want to start with the end in mind. What do you want to happen? And when you know what you want to happen, you can decide everything else to ensure that that thing that you want to happen does indeed happen. The final PR thing that I will share is around, apologies. And so if there's one thing that the public hates, it is people who flip-flop. It's people who say one thing today and then tomorrow they say something else. Or they say one thing today and then in a matter of hours they come back and they say something else. When Mark Driscoll got up to speak, he raised what I think is a legitimate concern around whether it was appropriate to have this person perform at a men's conference. But then he spoke with John Lindell, he came back to the stage, and he appeared to walk some of that back. So for me, I was thinking, okay, why why walk that back? Maybe you could say this wasn't the right venue or I didn't handle it correctly, but he raised a legitimate point. And if there were people in the audience who agreed with him that, this was not appropriate for this venue, then when he walked it back, then you leave those people second guessing themselves and wondering, okay, was it really that bad? I think we have to have the courage to speak the truth in love and try to find the best way to do that, and then stand on that conviction and not walk it back, because I think it undermines our credibility and it's very frustrating to the people who follow you. They want to believe that you believe what you say and that you are going to stand on it. Now, whenever something like this happens, it's easy to focus on the players in a given situation. But I think it's a lot more helpful if we focus on ourselves. And so sometimes when I hear about these crisis situations, I ask myself, what is the situation? What's the lesson from this situation for me? Or could God be using this situation to speak to me? Is there a message that God wants to share with me? Or could I be vulnerable in this kind of situation? Is there anything that I need to do to get my house in order or a client's house in order? Like, what is the takeaway for the rest of us? The temptation is to get so bogged down on the players and to make it all about them. But this is really an invitation for us to think about ourselves, what we do, why we do it, the areas in which we might be vulnerable. And I think that if we took that type of approach, our lives and our work would be stronger for it. So if you like this content and you haven't already, please be sure to like it. I want you to give it a like. I want you to subscribe. I want you to tell a friend about it. But again, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. If you find yourself and you're navigating a crisis and you're trying to think through how to manage it, you do not have to do that alone. You can book a paid consultation on my website, spotlightpr.org. And again, we'll talk about whether or not I might be a good fit to support you and walk with you through what you're going through. Thank you so much for listening, and take care.